I think that just as we're living in a nuclear age, we have grown so tremendously in scientific knowledge. It doesn't seem too much to say that men can begin to awaken to the fact that they haven't grown enough spiritually and haven't recognized their spiritual capacities.
Once something like eating is death, then you've struck at the very heart of life. The enemy of the older radical theories may have been the ruling class, but today the stakes of whether we will reform ourselves into a new kind of human being, a new kind of society, whether we will find selves worth being, the stakes of it are simply life
and
itself.
then for you guys, you probably would like to, if you're going to consider doing other classes with us, you'd want to look here at this part of the website. We divide the courses into 3 different categories: cult, culture, and cultivation. Cult is just religion. And this is a triad that Peter Maurin, one of the co-founders of the Catholic Worker Movement, came up with. So religion, and so like, for instance, you would see that under this category, Deacon Chris's class is listed, and so you could see a further description of that. And we also have the Harry Murray series. He's a Catholic worker who comes every 3 months, has a lot of experience, and takes on a new topic. And then we also have the Communio reading group study circle. It deals with the Communio journal, as well as just Resource Month theology, which is kind of like, especially hewing back to the original Christians and early church fathers. We have the category of culture, and so any courses that we have coming up, like for instance, mine fell under that. But I also have a reading group, Great Books reading group, and we have another reading group on the dialectic of the Enlightenment right now, but it depends on what our group leader, Jacob Hanshu, and his folks want to do. Right now, we don't have anything under cultivation, but that deals with agriculture and environment. And we are associated with a Catholic worker farm. And so we sort of like try to more or less crossbreed as much knowledge as possible. So check all that out when you get a chance, and you'll kind of see what we're, more of what we do and kind of how it comes together. All right. Okay, so you can begin to see kind of like hopefully the contrast between the ancient values and virtues and the Christian ones, right? But Aquinas still just took a ton of reasoning and knowledge from Aristotle, and he was adapting it and changing it for the Christian experience, the Christian knowledge. So now I want to turn to Aquinas's natural law, right? Because I think it will help us to understand further just how a Christian might use Aristotle's reasoning in order to kind of adapt it and turn it into something that we could use to decide how we will live our lives and how we will organize ourselves. So he developed this idea of natural law, kind of a reason that was embedded within not just human nature, but within all of creation, all of nature. And he followed this Aristotelian teleological reasoning. Okay, so he was very consistent in that, right? We see natural law, we see law through human experience and human behavior. For instance, we see what works to create harmony and peace amongst people and what works to make them thrive. And we see the types of behaviors that cause disintegration and harm and lack of thriving. Same thing in the natural world. There are things that can basically thwart health in nature, and there are things that will help nature be healthy. So everything achieves its perfection if it's in the right context, right? So that's Aristotelian teleology. So he's seeing natural law. Natural law is nature following that in, and humans understanding that they need to cooperate with that goal, which is basically, in Aquinas's view, God's goal, right? God has more or less set what the end is, or what the perfection is that will lead to the best state for everything. And our job is to kind of figure out what that law is. So Aquinas, having more or less kind of rediscovered Aristotle, the people of the 12th and 13th centuries were, rediscovering Aristotle. Aquinas was a 13th century thinker. He was obsessed, I would say, with trying to figure out how to make Aristotle's reasoning almost completely compatible with Christian revelation. And maybe he kind of went too far in some respects, but the exercise was a really fruitful one. But that's what he was doing. He was saying that he very much thought that what we might call science, for instance, and biblical revelation ought to be compatible. And of course, if we found that science or philosophical reasoning was not compatible with biblical teaching, then we should err on the side of revelation, biblical teaching. But most of the time, he thought that wouldn't happen because God created the world and put reason in it that we ought to be able to discover. So he did claim that all rational adult men and women could know and could understand natural law, even if they didn't read the Bible, just by observing the natural world and human beings. And Aquinas established a hierarchy of laws and goods. So I want to talk a little bit about, first of all, the hierarchy of laws. Okay. Thomas Aquinas said there were 4 types of laws. The first one, the highest one, is eternal law, which is all of the reason that God has, more or less, God's mind, and how it basically makes the entire universe operate, much of which we as human beings could never know. Okay, so Aquinas basically says we know it exists because we know God exists. On the other hand, because we're not God, we certainly can't know, but maybe 2% of that, right? And why do we know the 2%? Because of divine law, which is what Christians get from scriptures. Divine law tells us what God wants us to know, in the Christian case, through Jesus's teachings. And then we have this natural law, which is what the human mind can know about God's law through reason alone, if necessary. Aquinas made a fairly big deal out of, anybody, Christian and non-Christian alike, can know natural law. And to the extent that they do understand natural law, they're going to understand something of the mind of God, even if they're not a Christian. And then they can refine their notion of natural law through understanding Christian teachings, right? But that meant that there was some framework that anybody, regardless of their faith tradition, would be able to understand. That was natural law. And then human law, the lowest form of law, is that which human beings create. It can be really good, it can be bad. The better it is, the more it adheres to natural law. So natural law is the standard by which you should judge human law. Martin Luther King famously said, that there were basically God's laws, right? And then there were human laws. And he said, I'm not going to obey your human laws because I know through natural law, and he referenced it directly. He said, I know through natural law, human beings weren't made to be treated this way. So we won't be obeying your segregation laws. So this is a very, it's a type of reasoning that's carried forward from Aquinas's time. Human law is to be judged by that higher law through natural law and then knowledge of divine law. Okay. All right. So those are the kind of 4 types of law. And then I want to narrow the gaze to natural law. This is what human beings as rational creatures can know about God's world and about the reason that he put into it, that he embedded into it. And Aquinas said there were three primary precepts, meaning, really three major principles. And they were a hierarchy of goods. Okay. So on the bottom of this hierarchy, hopefully you can see my little pointer here in the red area, we have self-preservation and the preservation of others. And that's kind of like, first I have this instinctual need to preserve myself, my life, and to hopefully do so comfortably. I have a pretty strong instinct to preserve my family and other people who I love. And then I have a strong but lesser, inclination to preserve the bigger extended family of people around me. And I understand the connection between us and them. And then, it moves itself out. Okay. But it all starts with self-preservation and preservation of other people within our human species. And then the next level up is care and nurture of children and the nurture of family and community, to not only be able to survive, but to thrive. We create these connections and these social obligations, and they extend all the way from the marriage to all the way to the polis or beyond. And this is the area that makes us citizens. It makes us members of our family, but it also makes us citizens. And then finally, up here, we have contemplation of and worship of God. Now, interestingly, Aquinas would say this is the most important because this is the most uniquely human thing, is to think, to contemplate, to worship, to connect with God. But also, he says, we can't do these types of things up here if we don't have these other two. That in fact, if we don't have self-preservation, we literally cannot do anything else. And the more precarious we feel, the less we will ever be able to contemplate and worship God. So therefore, we have to keep in mind that there is this hierarchy of goods that kind of goes both ways. This is the most important in one respect because it's most human, but this is the most important in the other respect because without it, we are nothing. Okay, so we have to maintain this balance in his view. And that hierarchy informs how Aquinas says Christians should think about a variety of very important things. And so he speaks of the secondary precepts, and actually the 10 Commandments would be largely, not all, but most of them secondary precepts from this framework. They flow from those three primary precepts. But the way that Aquinas reasoned was very nuanced. A secondary precept, for instance, just to pick one of these, would be marriage. Okay, marriage would be in that second category, right, of nurturing and creating a family and community. And he would say that it's necessary for you to have marriage, to have a stable home so that children can be raised. Okay, but Aquinas, and normally he said this happens best in a monogamous marriage. Okay. However, Aquinas said there have been times in history, including times in biblical, in the Old Testament times, when monogamy was not the norm or was not the only possibility, that polygamy was. And that the reason for this had to do with the number of women relative to men. And so while normally monogamous marriage might be in accordance with natural law, if survival of women, for instance, in this case, and women and children are threatened, that might justify polygamy. Okay. So he's judging the principle of marriage according to the three precepts. And he's saying, well, we have to realize that survival is pretty important. It's kind of paramount. And therefore, there may be times when there has to be flexibility in this natural law, which normally would sanction monogamous marriage between just two people. Also, famously, Aquinas says war is wrong. It's especially aggressive war. Wars of aggression are wrong. However, if one is attacked, one is obligated, oftentimes morally obligated, to defend oneself and one's family. So defensive war is not. So you see there, like in the 10 Commandments, we have thou shalt not kill, right? Or thou shalt not murder, probably more accurately. Except, apparently, according to this reason, in cases of absolute self-defense. So you can see here in this list, everything was nuanced, right? Life is important, survival is important, but he did recognize that if it came down to the life of the mother or the life of the infant, the mother's life being threatened was justified for it to take precedence over the potential life of the infant. The reason why I can say this with confidence is that Aquinas was looking at a case of pre-birth infant baptism, with some people arguing that the mother's womb should be potentially opened up, if necessary, even if it killed her, so that the infant could be baptized. And Aquinas said, no, that's, that the life of the mother as an actual life was prioritized over the potential life of the infant. Same thing with property. Natural law seems to say that every person should be able to acquire and protect their private property that they have acquired, because that's what's conducive to good social order. But it's not an absolute right, because if you keep your property when you have more than enough and other people are starving, you have violated this idea of the universal destination of goods. God created the world for all people to be able to use its resources to thrive. Okay. So hopefully that gives you some idea of Aquinas's reasoning. I could teach a whole class on that, but I do think that it would take that to do a good job. I'll mention this one other thing because it's kind of important here. Aquinas argued that natural law mandates a faith in Jesus in that top tier, of contemplating God. You should have a faith in Jesus. But he recognized in the 13th century that there were people in the past who had never heard of Jesus because they couldn't, and people in the future that might not ever hear of Jesus because of where they were. And they could still be seen as saved by God through an implicit faith. In other words, people of sincerity who are seeking God and seeking the truth had an implicit faith in the God of the Christians. So, the other reason I wanted to talk a bit about this is because I think the Catholic Church sometimes is not well understood, simply because these thinkers are not read. I'm such a believer in primary text. And if you look at what Thomas Aquinas actually said, and he's one of the, one of the major founders of our, what now constitutes Catholicism, it's way more complicated and more nuanced and fairly intelligent compared to what people might think.